Alright, welcome back to chapter 4, part 2, and today we're going to talk about file input and output. And you're already familiar with this concept and working with files a little bit. However, we're going to dive deeper, and again, since this is a Java class, we're going to look at how to do all of these using Java. Let's recall a couple of things. So first of all, a file, if you want to work with it, you have to open it. Then you can either write data to a file or read data from a file, and then you have to close that file. There are two types of files in general, binary and text, and files can either be input files or output files. Alright, so whenever we want to work with files and whenever we want to write data to a file, we have to use the printWriter class. And what that class will do, simply it's gonna use print and println methods the same way as we displayed something on the screen using the system.out. The same way printWriter will do that, but instead of displaying it on our screen, it's gonna input that information into your file. And this is the way you would do this. So this is how you would open a file. We would have to create a printWriter object. In this case, it's output file. The name is up to you. So in this case, it's output file, but you can call it whatever you want. Then you would put an equal sign, and as always, when we create a new object in Java, we have to use the word new. So new, then the same class, printWriter, and then right here, you have to pass the name of the file that you want to open. And in this case, it's studentdata.txt. However, if this file already exists in your computer, it's going to be fully erased and replaced with a brand new file. Here is the continuation of the code. In this case, we're creating a object called output file, and then the name of the file that we're opening is names.txt. So after that, this is how you would actually write your data to a file. So you would use this same name that you created right here, in this case output file, then you would put dot and either print or print line. So remember how we use system.out.print or system.out.print line. This is the same idea, but instead of using system.out, we're using the name of our location where we store our file. So in this case, it's output file dot println Chris, output file dot println Catherine, output file dot println Jean. So we just wrote Chris, Catherine, and Jean to a file. And to close the file, this is what you would do. You would just put dot close and with empty parentheses and a semicolon. Remember when we were talking about the scanner class, we had to import java.util.scanner. However, when we're using the printWriter class, this statement should be on top of your program, on top of your file. So this would be import java.io.star with a semicolon at the end. So if you decide to use printWriter class in your programs, this is what should be in your file at the very top of your file. Since we're talking about printWriter class, we have to talk about such thing called exceptions. And exception happens when something unexpected happens in your Java programs. So whenever something like that happens, an exception is what we call is thrown. And what it does, it just tells you, it lets you know that something wrong is going on with your program, something unusual, and it's just easier for the programmer to understand what's happening because there are different types of exceptions. And for example, printWriter will throw at you IO exception. And what that stands for is just input output exception. And what it's gonna do, it's just gonna let you know, for example, if you didn't close the file or if you didn't open it the right way. If something like that happens whenever you're working with files, IO exception will be thrown. And for you have to define that you want this exception to be thrown. Otherwise, your code will just not compile. But in this case, if you define that you want your program to throw an IO exception, that way you will know that whenever your code doesn't compile, that there is a IO exception. And you do that by putting it on a line where you declare your main class. And so you would put public static void main string args throws, keyword throws, IO exception. This is all you have to do. Now we will be getting into a little bit more complicated thing right here. However, if you just follow along with me, you shouldn't have any problems. However, since I told you the printWriter object will erase the file if it already exists. To avoid that, we have to use a FileWriter object. So it's the same idea. The creation of a FileWriter object is the same as the printWriter object. So you just put FileWriter, then whatever name you want it to have equals new FileWriter, and then you have to put the name of the file right here, put a comma, and say true. And what that's gonna do, it's just gonna append text to your file instead of just deleting this file as a whole. After that, we have to create our printWriter object the way we did before. However, instead of using the name of the file here, we will append an object. We will append a FileWriter object. We're gonna pass it as our argument to our printWriter object. So I know there's a lot of words like object and FileWriter, but just look at this sentence right here. This is all you have to do. You have to create printWriter object called FW. It doesn't have to have this exact name, but it's up to you. Then you would put an equal sign, new printWriter, and then we will create a new object inside of our printWriter object. So new FileWriter, then whatever name you want it to have, comma, true. Whatever file you want to open, comma, true. This is how you bypass deleting of the original file if it already exists. If your file is not in the same folder as your code and your source code, this is what you will have to do. Instead of just putting the name of the file, you will have to provide a path to the file. And path just means the location of your file. And you can do that, you can find that by going on YouTube and looking up how to find a path of your file. And there's so many tutorials to do that, but all you have to know for this class is that if your code is not in the same folder as your file, you have to provide a path to that file. Now, how to read data from a file. So we just learned how to write data to a file. Now, how do you read data from a file? And our old friend Scanner class comes to help here, and I will introduce you to the file class. So all you have to know is that you have to create a file object and pass the name of the file that you want to open to the file class constructor. So this is what you're gonna do, file, then whatever name you want that file to have, in this case it's my file, then you would put an equal sign, new file, and then whatever file you want to open. In this case it's customers.txt. Then after this line, we have to open our scanner. And remember, when we used scanner before, we would put new scanner system.in. Right here, we would put system.in, which meant that we want to get input from the keyboard. But in this case, we do not want input from the keyboard, we want input from the file, right? So what we do, we say scanner, then whatever name you want your object to have, in this case is input file, equals new scanner, and then whatever name you put right here when you were creating your file. In this case it's my file, so they have to match, and now we have my file right here too. This is how you would do it in one statement. Scanner input file equals new scanner, new file, customers.txt. The same way you could put everything in one statement when we were writing to a file. So this is a little example right here. You can see that we have a scanner called keyboard, scanner object called keyboard, where we will get input from the user, because every time you see system.in, that means that we are getting input from the keyboard, from the user themselves. Now, then we are asking the user to enter the file name, so they would enter their file name, and we would store it in a string called file name by using keyboard.nextLine. We would store that, and then we would open our new file for reading using the same scanner class that we use for keyboard. The only difference here is that we used new scanner, and then instead of putting system in, we put new file with the file name that user provided right here for us. And the good thing about the scanner class and working with files and reading data from a file, that all of the methods that you would use to read keyboard input are working the same way to read input from data. So in this case, if we wanted to read a line from the file, we would just say input file right here, and see the same name, input file here, input file dot whatever method we want to use. In this case, we want to read a line, so we use next line. Same thing with exceptions. Whenever we use a scanner, scanner also throws an IO exception, so you have to be familiar with that, and you have to make sure that you throw an IO exception and you put it in the header of your class that has a scanner object. So whenever we want to detect where our file ends, a scanner has a very useful method called hasNext that will return either true or false. So it is a Boolean method. Now, when we open the file, we do it the same way as we always did, and then we can put a little while loop that's gonna evaluate to true only if our file has more data to it. And we do it by using our object, where we stored our file, in this case it's input file, and then we put dot hasNext with parentheses. And then as long as this evaluates to true, that will mean that we have some data that we can read from the file, and then we will just print out whatever we have in that file. However, once we reach the end, this statement will evaluate to false, and this while loop will stop executing. Okay, and the last thing that we're going to talk about today regarding chapter 4 is going to be the random numbers, generating them with the random class. And again, we have to import that little utility. We have to import the random class, and this is the import statement: import java.util.random with a capital R with a semicolon at the end. And this would be your object creation instance of the random class. So again, the same definition as we did with any other object. So in this case, random, whatever name you want it to have, in this case it's random numbers, equals new random and your parentheses. And here are your methods of your random class. So there is a next double, there's next float, next int, next integer, that will give you back a number with a range, with a specified range. So next double will return your next random double number as a double, and you remember that double is just a decimal, so this number will be within the range of 0.0 and 1.0. Now next float, the same idea, but it's going to be returned as a float. Remember, float is a decimal also, with a range of 0.0 until 1.0. And next int will return to you a random number from this big negative number to this big positive number. However, if you want it to be in a certain range, you will have to use this method right here, next int, and then the number will be within the range of 0 to whatever number you provided as an argument here. Alright, and this was the last slide that we had and last topic that we had to talk about. I know it was a lot of information, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions, if you want to set up a Zoom. This class is much more fast-paced than your PLD 101 class, so I would recommend that you start working on your assignments early, and yeah, just don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always available and I'm always happy to help you guys. And I will see you in the next video.